Alright, terminology time. I have a supplement video that I'm going to post going through each of these motions. Please understand these motions. Understand that we don't have flexion and extension at the ankle joint. If I am pointing my toes down or pointing my foot down, I'm plantar flexing. I'm moving towards the plantar surface of my foot. That's plantar flexion. The opposite, when the dorsum of my foot is moving upward, then that's going to be dorsiflexion. Those are sagittal plane motions. Inversion, eversion. Motion of the foot is whole, and it occurs sometimes as a whole foot, sometimes as individual joints, and we're going to get into that nitty-gritty stuff a little later, but this is a frontal plane motion. Abduction, adduction. Again, these are going to be transverse plane motions because the angle of the ankle joint. Now notice what I did not say here. I did not say supination and pronation. We're going to get into those guys a little later. The reason I did not say those terms right now is because those are combination motions. Supination is a combination of several different motions. Pronation is a combination of several different motions. So definitely make sure that you know the osteology, make sure you know the motions, make sure you know what plane each of those motions occurs in, because this is very important to know. Now, big thing to note here, when we talk about joint motion at the ankle, triplanar motion, this is where the terms supination and pronation come in. The reason we have a triplanar motion is because the axis, and this is very similar to what we saw at the elbow, if you remember that from last semester. The axis is not straight. It occurs at a little bit of an obliquity or a little bit of an angle. So what we have here, if we have one motion occur, we're typically going to have all three motions occur. And the reason is because we have an oblique angle. So definitely make sure that you know that. Make sure that you understand which motions are going to happen with other motions. That's also very important to know. So taking a look at the joints of the rear foot. Remember, that rear foot is only going to be my calcaneus and my talus. The articulations we have here are going to be something called the Talocrural joint, and that's also known, and I'm going to use air quotes even though you can't see it, the ankle joint. What makes up my ankle joint? Medial malleolus, lateral malleolus, and the trochlea or the talar dome. This joint is a modified hinge joint. So take the time, understand which of those surfaces is convex and which of those surfaces is concave. Understand also which motion is going to happen in the open chain and which motion is going to happen in the closed chain. So again, this is a great time. Pause the video, understand these concepts before you move forward, because we're going to start building on these concepts. Now take a look at the motion that happens at the talocrural joint. Understand that, and you can see by the picture, it's not a straight joint. We have a little bit of an obliquity. So the axis of rotation is rotated about 20 to 30 degrees in the transverse plane. So in layman's terms, it's twisted a little bit. Also understand the axis of the ankle is on about a 10-degree decline on the lateral side. That's going to start giving you some clues, because as we start moving into things like pronation and supination and which bone is moving on which other bone, what we're going to see is those bones are going to a lot of times move in the path of least resistance, or they're going to move based on where the forces are. So understand this. Spend some time with this slide. Now, what we're going to see also is that we're going to have much more plantar flexion than we do dorsiflexion. Typically, you're going to see 50 degrees of plantar flexion in most people. Dorsiflexion, we're going to see normally about 20 to 30 degrees. Now, you probably have already read in the textbook this concept of a subtalar joint. So what I want you to understand with the subtalar joint is what we're talking about. Obviously, the word sub means under, and the word talar means talus, right? Can't get more simple than that. So understand that what we're looking at here is the articulation between the inferior aspect of the talus and the superior aspect of the calcaneus. Now, this is where all those great little facets, all those little articulating surfaces come in between the calcaneus and the talus. Now, we're going to classify this joint as a synovial multiplanar joint. Very important to remember because this talus is going to start sliding literally all over the place as we start moving the ankle joint around. Take a breath with this slide. Take some time with this slide. There's a lot on this slide. There's a lot of information. What I want you to get out of this slide is that the axis of rotation is not purely in one direction. The subtalar joint, in my mind, mimics the facet joints of the spine. Okay, so if you remember from last semester, when we had one motion, we had another motion because things bumped off each other. The superior articulating facet bumped off the inferior articulating facet, and they slid around and they did all sorts of stuff, creating multiplanar motion. That's what happens here. Okay, so understand that concept. Also understand that the subtalar joint, because of its offset nature, allows this combination of motions. It allows this supination and pronation. But spend some time with this. Understand how that foot and ankle is put together. Understand how that subtalar joint is put together, because that's really going to start playing into how the rest of the foot and ankle move. Okay. Another big, deep breath with this slide. It's going to be okay. I promise you guys it's going to be okay. Supination. We're going to have to understand what supination means. We're also going to have to understand how supination is made. I'm going to post extra slides. I'm going to post extra supplement material on this subject. Okay? It's probably going to be in the form of a drawing and a video. So, first thing we got to do, we have to differentiate what happens when I supinate in the non-weight bearing position and when I supinate in a weight bearing position. So already we should be thinking non-weight bearing position, okay, that's going to be an open chain motion. Weight bearing position, that's going to be a closed chain motion. When I'm non-weight bearing supination, three things happen. Calcaneal inversion, calcaneal adduction, calcaneal plantar flexion. When I'm weight bearing, what happens is that I have calcaneal inversion, talar abduction, talar dorsiflexion, and tibiofibular external rotation. Okay, I'm going to do a couple videos on this to make sure we can kind of drive that concept home. but understand what's happening weight bearing and non-weight bearing, because as we start moving into concepts like the gait cycle, we're going to have to understand what motions are happening when I'm non-weight bearing, things like the swing phase of gait, and when I'm weight bearing, things like the stance phase of gait. So now pronation. This is the opposite of supination. Non-weight bearing pronation. Calcaneal eversion, calcaneal abduction, calcaneal dorsiflexion. When I am weight bearing with pronation, calcaneal eversion, talar adduction, talar plantar flexion, tibiofibular internal rotation. Now, note that in both in the supination slide and in the pronation slide, I highlighted the calcaneal motion because it's the same weight bearing and non-weight bearing. What's not the same is everything else, because everything else changes. And the reason is, and we're going to get into this in the supplement videos, is ground reaction forces obviously happen. Gravity obviously happens, and the closed chain has much more of an effect on motion. And we're going to have things like internal moments occur that are going to really drive and really influence what motion is happening at the talus and the calcaneus. Now, looking at the subtalar joint, again, take a look at the joint. Obviously, what we're looking at here is we have a concave talus on a convex calcaneus in terms of the subtalar joint. Now, I understand that I just said that the talus is a big old convex surface, but when we're looking at the subtalar joint specifically, this is what we're looking at. Okay. Also understand that we're going to have a tarsal canal that divides the joint into two cavities by the talocalcaneal interosseous ligament. So that's definitely something you want to make sure you know as well, that we don't just have one big unit here, we have a couple different units. So now looking at the midfoot, what we're going to notice here is that we're going to have some midtarsal and intertarsal motion here. Remember that midfoot is going to be my navicular, my cuboid, and my cuneiforms. So understand where that midfoot joint is and understand where those joints are. Also understand that the midfoot also goes by an eponym called a Chopart's joint. So sometimes you're going to hear about a Chopart's fracture, and that's a fracture to the midfoot. And then the joints themselves are pretty easy. They're all named for what they touch. So the joint between the talus and the navicular, well, guess what? That's one's called the talar navicular joint. The joint between the calcaneus and the cuboid, you probably already guessed it, it's called the calcaneal cuboid joint. Okay? These are also going to have ligaments that are going to attach, obviously, those bones together in those articulating surfaces. Good news is they're all named exactly for what they attach. So the talonavicular joint is held together by the talonavicular ligament. Man, I can't make it any easier than that. Thank you for the anatomists for making it that easy. So taking a look at the midtarsal joint, what we have to look at here is there's a couple different models. I, as you guys know, like the easy way, and I like the easy model. So if I was going to pick between a 2-axis model or a 1-axis model, I'm probably going to go with the 1-axis model. So what we have to understand, this works just like the rear foot. Everything's just not on one plane. Okay, everything is just a little offset. And what that does is that gives us the ability to perform this triplanar motion. So not only are we going to have a triplanar motion at the rear foot, we're going to have a triplanar motion at the midfoot. So, and that's because everything is just offset a little bit.